And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Alberto Alejandro Lopez, intuitive parallel starseed and the author of Ascension Chronicles, Freeing Humanity from Slavery Through Higher Consciousness. Alberto, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you. And Alberto, how did you go from someone who had a successful career as an executive into writing books about consciousness?
That's as interesting a story as I believe anybody can have. I also believe that it's a reflection of the times that we're living now. I grew up being the normal person. I was always very empathic, intuitive, but I was focused on my life like the way that society prescribes it. You know, you go to school, you grow up, you become a good citizen, you work as hard as you can. And what I found was that money is a game. And like any game, you can learn it and be good at it. I was always good at the Rubik's Cube, and I was always good with other games. So I understood how interest accrue and how you can keep yourself out of debt. And I also was able to easily relate with people because of my ability to tune into their feelings. Therefore, when I was able to motivate people and create great teams, then suddenly in 2012, I hit a brick wall. What had always worked for me suddenly was not working. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand soul contracts. I didn't know any of that stuff. Because throughout my professional career, I'm an inventor. I have several patents, and I always worked on what I call now the material sciences. In other words, that if you cannot measure it, it doesn't exist. Some people refer to it as the laws of physics. Now I, of course, understand that that's not quite so. But for me, if you do something and you understand it, it's like a switch. You turn on the light. Every time you press the switch, the light comes on. It's predictable. It's repeatable. Suddenly, in 2012, none of that was happening. Suddenly, what I knew to be the case, what I knew to be reality, was changing, and I didn't understand why. At that time, I had an urgency to learn quantum physics. I always wanted to study more. I've been a lifelong student, and when I did, suddenly everything began to make sense to me. In that, it's there's no matter; it's all frequency, and it's all radiation, and so. Because I'm considered to be an expert in acoustics. Because of that, it was easy for me to make the leap into the quantum science without having to think of it as little spheres or little particles. I jumped right into the frequency side. And that's what now I understand was essential for me to make the leap. That's what I needed in order to open up. And then after that, I began to have these downloads. Now, I had been meditating for several years. I did it mostly because I wanted to manage stress. I found that meditation was a great way of helping, live a better life, a healthier life. But meditation also helps people learn to keep a quiet mind. And that quiet mind was essential. As I was driving to work one day, I didn't have the radio on. I was just quiet. And I began to have ideas. So that, these downloads began to come in and they began to literally unfold. So what seemed to be like one small packet of information, then it became 2 bits of information, 4 bits of information on its own. And I had had in the past aha moments when I suddenly understood something, whether it's cable transmission or something of that nature. But this was different because whatever I was receiving, it was growing it by itself. So then I realized I had to write this stuff down. And I began to write it, and what would come to me in just 1 second or two suddenly would become a week's worth of writing. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote. At first, these this information was somewhat related to the way I thought. It looked more like ideas, but soon it turned into things that I had never been interested in. But I was able to go and find scientific evidence that what I was getting was correct. That helped build trust in what I was getting. Then, after the scientifically verifiable stuff came through, and I began to trust it because I was able to do the research and see that the information was out there. It was compartmentalized, it was difficult to collect, but it was out there. Anyone can go on Google Scholar and do, as long as you understand the scientific terms, you can do researches on anything because almost everything has been somewhat somehow tested. So it's been evaluated by some engineer or some scientist someplace. So after I developed the trust, then I began to get the downloads on spirituality.
When you get these downloads, how does it happen? I mean, are you hearing something or is it a conversation or what?
The downloads come, first of all, for me, I don't hear. There's no conversation. For me, the way they come is just like an idea. The difference with an idea is when you have an aha moment and you get to understand something, you have a new idea or new product, it's just that. The difference with the downloads is that they multiply. They unfold and unfold and unfold and unfold. You don't keep the communication open. It's just you receive something, but instead of being just one thing, it's coming in as a compressed pack. And that then unfolds. So it is very, for me, that's why I had to write it down to be able to keep track of it.
It sounds to me, it's kind of like when you download a file and then you've got to unzip it.
Yep.
It's like a large file that comes to you and then it slowly unpacks, right?
Yes.
Where does this file come from?
I didn't know at first. Now I understand. I actually, in one of the chapters in the book, I talk about memory and our connection to the universe. So some people refer to it as the Akashic Records. The universe is absolute memory. There is no need for us to hold memory in us. And that's because once you get down to it, time and space do not exist. They're just something that we use to interpret an experience. Therefore, everything in the universe is here and now. That means that if you want to access any information, all you need to go is to the here and now where that information is. As I open myself up through understanding of quantum mechanics, quantum science, it's like almost I put a key in my consciousness that allowed me to accept what was next. And that which was next was the axis that I had clearly committed to as a soul, as a higher self. You could think of it as a soul contract. And the reason why everything had to change in my life, the reason why the brakes had to be put on, as I mentioned to you, it's almost like I hit a brick wall, is because I had I couldn't continue going the way that I was for the contracts that I had. Now I understand that very well. I didn't understand it at the time. When I had those downloads that deal with spirituality, I opened up a channel of communication with my higher self where I was able to ask questions. For example, I asked why, because I was told in one of my downloads that money was not for me. So then I said, why did I have so much success with money? And the answer came that it was because it's a game, nothing more. But that if I just looked at my life, I will always have enough. And then I was able to see back. I grew up as a very impoverished child, and I've had even when I was in the university, I didn't really use money. So I had this views of all those times when money was not important for me. And then I would ask other questions. I would ask, why did I have the experiences I did? And again, everything was presented as it came as, you have this experience because it was needed for this other experience. And then I was able to then connect, kind of do an inventory of my life and realize that every aspect was essential. I lived in England. Now I understand why. I visited Japan. Now I understand why. There was a time when I had an urgency to travel to Yucatan and visit some of the anthropological sites there. People don't know that in Yucatan there's 60 different pyramid cities, but most of them are not visited by anybody. So some of those places I just went, and there was a guy on a truck at the entrance and asked, hey, do you want to go in? Sure. And I went in. Now I understand that I had to go to those places to connect with them. And it's almost like an exchange in energy. I brought my energy, it gave me its energy. And these are all different codes that we put in ourselves in order to open ourselves for what's next. Remember that right now, as a society, as a community, as a collective, humanity is going through a lot of different changes, and all those changes connect with what we agreed to do. Those are every change, everything, whether we perceive it as good or bad, everything becomes a key that is necessary for what we have to do next. And that's the reason why for me writing the book was so important, because I realized that not only was what I experienced relevant to a lot of the people right now, I also understood that there was a need for creating a connection between the spiritual world and scientific world, and I knew that I was uniquely qualified for that. So my book, even though it deals with spirituality, it has 40 pages of scientific reference, and this is, small print scientific reference for all the concepts that I deal with, because every aspect of spirituality is supported by scientific evidence. It just, again, compartmentalized. Therefore, it is difficult for people to put it all together. But for me, I wanted to create a kind of guide where people who have the intention of connecting with who they are and who came here to raise their consciousness, I wanted to give them very quantifiable, tactile instructions or ideas that could help them walk the path, in a much more structured way. So the book is written from what you would consider from dark to light. It addresses, how we find ourselves trapped by money. For example, when I talk about enslavement, we're slaves of, we become victims, for example. We slave ourselves to the victimhood mentality. We live in fear constantly. We live in anger. Those are all low frequency um, states. Unfortunately, for most of us, is that they're in the bottom 20% of the potential consciousness of a human. Once you tap and you break out of those, then you have a universe literally to connect with. And so the book is structured in a way where it addresses every one of the different stages. And I wrote it with, even though I do address the science behind it, I also wrote it with uh, very touching stories for every chapter. So I wanted to ground it and associate it with something people would connect with.
After you got these downloads and you visited the pyramids in the Yucatan, did you get any new abilities?
Yes, once, and I believe that this is something that can affect everybody. Everyone, in order to go to where we have to be, everyone will not only be able to raise their consciousness, but at the same time, that increasing consciousness will open them up to other gifts. For example, I've become much more telepathic. I've been able to tune into people's feelings and thoughts much better. Being able to anticipate, what's around the corner, what someone's about to say. It just, and you know I often say that once you raise your consciousness, miracles happen daily. The truth is, miracles happen every single day, all the time. We're just not conscious enough to notice them. So when someone suddenly switches themselves on, they're able to tell. And it's like this: you go to a supermarket, and how many times do you come out talking about the 70,000 products they sell? Most people would never do because they don't have the bandwidth. Consciousness is that. And they come out maybe talking about two or three products. But when you increase your consciousness, suddenly you're able to tell all these other things that happen.
Many people talk about raising your consciousness, and it feels like it is a generic term. Can you be more specific? Like, does it mean to be a better person? Does it mean to just be, to have more energy or to be more aware? How do you define that?
So in the old Greek, logos, which is confused with word, logos was divine understanding. So the very, very beginning of the Bible, and I'm not trying to be religious here, but I'm just describing something that is already out there. It says in the beginning there was the Word. The Word was God. What God was the Word. What was God was the Word. But in reality, it was logos because it came from the old Greek. And what it really is in the beginning there was consciousness. That's it. Consciousness. So what is consciousness? I actually dedicate the largest chapter in the book is number 1, where I set the groundwork, the foundation for the understanding of consciousness. Of course, it takes a whole book to be able to explore the whole thing, but that chapter was big for that reason. In essence, in simple terms, consciousness is the window that you use to observe and understand reality. It's that simple. The bigger the window that you use, the bigger your consciousness. So, for example, if my window is narrow, I may not understand the, the homeless person living under the bridge. If I make my window bigger and I can now see it at a different angle, I may then be able to understand that homeless person. If the window is big enough, I may then be able to love the person regardless of what anybody else says. But it's the size of the window, but it's also the depth that we can see into that window. So if you want to look at it as a quantifiable thing, is the width and the depth that you can gain out of that window. If that window is what you use to understand your universe, if you are here to have an experience, you have to understand what that experience is in order to have it. So you always would have, as long as you exist, you're going to have consciousness. The question is how much, how big is that window? And it is important to understand that a larger window is not ideal for everybody. For example, if I would have had the window I have today, I would have never coached football. There was a time when I coached football and I had a lot of fun, and I was able to lead a winning team in high school. But I would have never done it because I would have been fixated on other things that were bigger. But having the experience of football, having the experience of connecting with others, competition is something that is very uniquely human. I don't believe that war is, but I do believe that competition is. So, for example, I was talking with my daughter about her playing volleyball, and she was excited, and I was excited because she was describing how she moved and how she responded to the other team's plays. And then suddenly, my little dog, Lucky, is a mix between Lhasa Apso and Shih Tzu. He came right next to us, and he was worried, and he looked at me and asked the question, what happens? Is this good or bad? I have this ability to understand Lucky. There's no words, it's just emotions. So I then asked my daughter to please forgive me, and I stopped talking to her, and I explained to Lucky, this is telepathic. I said, Lucky, Very, very sorry. We humans have a lot of emotions, and we can go from one to the next very quickly. And I know that is something that you cannot do. What we're doing here with Linda is we're talking about competition. And when I sent the message of competition, his eyes opened up. He went around the bed. We were in my room. He went around the bed, and I told Linda, he wants to participate in competition with us. I said he's going to go grab his toy so you can fight for the toy with him. And she's like, no, but the toy's not there. So then Lucky comes around the bed, looks at us, and he's got the toy in his mouth. He's ready to do it. So then I said, see, he wants to do it. So she went over there to play with him. Um, Competition is essential for us. It's not normal for other animals, but they can understand it. And I would have never been able to do coaching or other things that I did through my life if I would have had the consciousness of today. So what we need to understand is that consciousness is a frequency. It's a resonance. And just like some people prefer 105.2 as a radio station, and others prefer 97.1, let's say, it doesn't matter which one it is, as long as it's the one that resonates with you. Do you want to do Fox Sports? You want to do Latino music? Whatever you want. One frequency is different than the other one. One is a universe that is literally different than the other one. Choose the one that works for you, and neither is better than the other one.
Well, how do we raise our consciousness?
Through understanding, because consciousness is how we understand the universe. So you can do exercises, and that's what the book has. It's a series of exercises. First, you need to understand who you are, where you are. For example, a lot of times we think that we're not divisive. We think that we like to unify people, but then we realize that politically we're on one side or the other. So which one is it? There's great people on both sides, but somehow we participate in that division because we're not conscious of it. So once you do the exercise of knowing what it is, right? For example, I describe in the book, I describe the Stanford jail uh, exercise or study where good students, great kids, were divided into two random groups, guards and prisoners. Then suddenly, within less than a week, the prisoners were traumatized by how abusive the guards were. When they finished, the prisoners didn't know what going home meant. And this was just an exercise. But creating that division created that anger, created that conflict. So we participate on those type of things in our daily lives because we were not conscious of it. And once you begin to address it, and again, we don't look at it as a bad thing or a good thing. That's why the book needs to start with the dark. It's not that I want to dwell on the negative. I simply want to help people see their reality. And when they're ready, they move on to whatever is next.
Can you give us an example of one of the exercises from your book?
Yes. For example, I describe how I was talking to with my one of my cousins. He passed away recently. He was a philosopher, an incredibly smart person. He was a PhD in philosophy many times over, the brightest person in the family. And someone like him, I was working with him because he was having trouble with his person, with his being, despite having all that rationality and all that understanding. And one of the exercises that I gave him is, can you love the cashier at the supermarket? And the answer was, I can love her as a cashier. I said, no, you're qualifying it. Can that love be unconditional? So then he struggled with that. I said, we're not talking about, I mean, your dog loves you unconditionally. Doesn't come and say, hey, I love you because you're feeding me. Doesn't say, I love you because you're my neighbor. So can you do the same? Then I made it more difficult for him. I said, okay, so let's now look at a light pole outside. Can you love the light pole? Can you get to the point where you can find what makes that light pole what it is? You need to understand, for example, that the light pole is perfect at doing its job. It may have been created in a family that was like a factory, where there was no love and no connection to the siblings, the other poles that were created at the same time. But the truth is that that pole does exactly what it's intended to do and has a really strong reason for being proud and being happy. Can you then see that and get to the point where you can love it? Because at the end of the day, we're all energy. The only difference is that frequency, and I go into that in the book. I explain how if you through frequency, through the numbering system used for frequency, you can have infinite universes everywhere. You can have infinite dimensions. There's infinites available anywhere. I explain how that happens. And because we're all energy, we're all the same at the end of the day. Whether it's material or whether it's spiritual, it's all the same. And if we can then get to find how to love a Paul, then you can love your brother, your sister, the soldier on the other side of the war.
How does consciousness relate to slavery?
I'll give an exercise on this, and this is for your audience. It's not in the book, but because I didn't think of it until recently. Imagine yourself being a cowboy, and you see you you're on top of your horse, and you're going through the prairie, and then suddenly you find a herd of horses. There's about 20 of them. These are wild horses, and you decide to trap them. How can one single cowboy trap all those horses? Well, what you do is you capture the stallion. Then all of them follow. From the perspective of the horses, they didn't go from free to slave. They remain free because now they're in a ranch. They don't know the difference because their consciousness is not sufficient to identify that. So what happens is that if the horses knew, if they had enough consciousness, enough understanding, then they would have been trapped in the first place. What it means is that you're not going to be trapped by money. You're not going to be trapped by the fact that there is a shortage of petroleum or any of those things. Once your consciousness expands, you can live in the society, participate in society, but now in your terms. If everybody does it, then I actually explain in how the economy can shift into one where we could work one day per week without much change to our standard of living. But and this is something that I present in a quantifiable form. But it's not possible for as long as everyone walks around with their eyes closed, with their window narrow. It is essential for us to take advantage of this time because the energy of the planet is shifting. You can see it in the Schumann resonance. I describe how that takes place and where you can find that evidence. And it's a time for everything from the animals to the plants to the planet to raise consciousness. Now, not everybody chooses to do that, and we need to get to the point where we love them. We all have family members who disagree with what we talk about. That's okay. That's just what they chose to be. But you can never get to that moment of peace without having a higher consciousness. So, for those who wish to have that higher understanding, that's the reason why, the book is written in parts. So, I recommend for people not to see it as a novel. This is not the kind of book that you're going to read from front to back in 1 week or in 2 sessions. This is the kind of thing where I suggest for people to read one chapter and then put it aside because they have to process it. Once you get to really understand, and it needs to be an understanding that is not just rational, but it's also through the heart. Once you incorporate that understanding, once your window opens, your resonance will increase. And by the way, your state your resonance, your state of your frequency, it's very physical. You can see it in how time works. The we the reason why we need time when we come into this experience, and it's very dense. We come into a living an existence of low consciousness. Again, if we had a higher consciousness, we wouldn't make some of the mistakes that we do. We wouldn't do wars. We wouldn't do other things. So in order to experience that kind of life, that kind of suffering, or whatever it is, those kind of challenges, we have to come into a low consciousness state. Well, because we don't understand enough, the universe needs to be presented to us, our existence needs to be presented to us in very thin slices, one slice at a time, and that's time. Therefore, when you raise your consciousness, you have less of a need for time. You can get all the way to the top of consciousness where you no longer need time at all. I explain how we actually went through an ascension in consciousness in our lives already when we went from being children who, depending on their family for their identity, we were members of the pack, to being adolescents and we developed a sense of self. We wanted to do nothing with our families. We wanted to be independent and prove that we were independent beings, that we were special, different. And when we raise our consciousness, that's the reason why, as children, days were very long, boring. Once you go after adolescence, suddenly days go faster. You can also see time reflected in if you have a very bad experience of a beloved member of your family dies and you're depressed. Suddenly the day is forever long. Or you're having such a great time that the hours of the day just flew by. So that even your state, even in today, if you wake up to have a wonderful day, your your need for time will be smaller. You can pack more time together and consume it in bigger chunks. Where if you wake up and you just want to have a difficult day, then the day will be elongated. You will require every single slice at a time.
What about the people out there that are happy with their level of consciousness and they just want to stay where they're at?
I celebrate them. I celebrate them because if you want to be aligned with who you are, you need to follow your greater joy. If, for example, for me, I had the urgency to learn quantum physics in order to be ready for the rest, but I felt it in my gut, and I was very happy while I was learning it. Writing the book made me very, very happy. It didn't matter that I had to work on it during holidays and times when everybody was celebrating. It didn't matter to me. In the same way, if somebody is happy while in a low consciousness state, it's because that's where they chose to be. And that means they're in alignment with who they are. And if others raise their consciousness, it doesn't mean that we see them as less or as inferior, because it's just a different radio station. There's no better, there's no worse. Those who are at a higher consciousness then can look at those with lower consciousness and find ways to love them in a way they may not be able to find. But it doesn't matter whether they do or not. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Remember, to come in here, we chose to be beings of low consciousness. And for those who interact with angels, the first thing they notice that angels do nothing but love us. They could never affect our free will. They could never harm us. They could never do even positive things for us, because they understand that it's up for us to do, to select, to change. So I celebrate those who choose to be in lower consciousness.
What's next up for you?
I am taking a break. No, listen, I keep growing. Everybody, this is a process where we all grow. What I have found is that I have a reason to embrace whatever comes. I I work daily on myself. I do meditation. I don't ask many questions to my higher self anymore, because a lot of the spiritual questions have been answered. I understand that now. Now I know that if hardship comes, it's because it has to. And I no longer. I'll be honest with you. I've worked on my fears. I have no fears. I have no, there's no social pressure that can make me do or be away from who I am. Uh, I am tremendously happy in my space. I understand that things may get tight. I mean, you can just look out the window and see, all the conflicts there are and all that. But none of that bothers me because now I understand that it is all part of what it has to be. In the meantime, I look around and I'm very happy with my family. I'm very happy. I'm right now. I'm right here in front of vegetation and nature. This is, I think, the best that we have. We have a beautiful planet. Gaia is incredible. Gaia is the mother that never asks for anything in exchange and gives itself to us. And we live the most wonderful planet. Humanity is beautiful. Humanity, no matter how people suffer, we're the most creative beings. You have challenges here and there, and people create solutions. They create drawings that can make people happy, no matter how difficult things are. So as beings, we're beautiful, we're incredible. And in all honesty, I can't do but just, I can't wait to see what comes out of all this. Because at least for me, I am not the person I used to be, decades ago. And I think that the possibility and the opportunity for everyone is just fantastic. And I'm not a kumbaya person. I do believe that those who will be of higher consciousness will be attracted to that. And I believe those who will be of lower consciousness will have to have those experiences. But only in a planet like this with so much life and so much diversity can all that happen at the same time.
Many people are concerned with the coming changes to our society. What do you see is up next for humanity?
I don't think that I would have gone through these changes had I not signed up to be part of it. So no matter how old I am, I know deep inside of me that I'm going to be here to witness, to participate on this. I know that this is going to affect my children, my grandchildren. I know that this is going to affect a lot of people that I care for. But anyone who asks me about it, all I can tell them is embrace, live your greater joy, and embrace. My higher self had so much more consciousness than I could ever hope to have. Within that consciousness, it understood very well when I was born in my family what the outcome could be. It understood the health problems that I could face. It understood the challenges I would have with my siblings or my cousins or anybody else. Being born in Mexico comes with other challenges, and my higher self knew that very well. But I'm not in Mexico now. I'm where I have to resonate. Where I'm here in South Florida, which is the center of Atlantis. So I mean, I'm surrounded by a lot of beautiful people. So no matter what happens, reality has to have a balance, and things have to be. For some people, they will look bad. For some people, they will just be what they're supposed to be.
It sounds like to me that something big is coming, but I feel like you're a little inhibited to say what it is.
I have had visions. I've had a lot of visions, and I I have to remember this. We have parallel timelines. I explain how parallel timelines work in my book. So I myself have switched timelines in ways that I can describe and I can easily tell. For example, at work at the plant, there's a guard. It's a big plant, and there's at the entrance you can see the different buildings for the different things that take place at the company. And there used to be a big building where all the repairs were done for the equipment, and it used to be coming in on the right side. And then suddenly I drive in one day and it's now on the left side. It was a huge timeline shift that I was able to recognize. If I ask anyone there, everybody's going to say the building was always there because for them, that's the timeline they were in. So I've had a lot of visions. Uh, you know, a lot of conflict on the streets. I've had a lot of visions about bombs and things of that nature. But the thing is, I know very well that some people may experience those and others don't. And the last thing I want to do is to impose those on anybody. If there are people who will live a timeline where none of that happens, then I want them to have that. It's a matter of free will. So it's not so much that I don't want to be negative, because to me, it's just a reality. In some of the visions I saw, for example, gangs, armed gangs, blocking roads and shooting at anything that drove in between towns. That may never happen for the reality of all you people in your audience. Does that mean that that didn't happen at all? No, I was maybe peaking at a parallel timeline. But at the same time, if your members did not sign up for that, there's no reason why they should be concerned with that. That's just not the kind of trauma they should have.
In the beginning, I mentioned that you are a parallel intuitive star seed.
Yes.
What does that mean?
My original, if we were to look at time in a linear form, my original incarnation was actually in a parallel universe. And I have lived, this is my third universe, my third reality, if you want to think of it. And so that's what makes me parallel. In general, parallel beings have this way of viewing things different than everybody else, because a lot of times the laws of physics, or the phenomena that occurs in those other realities, may be different than what we experience here. So that opens someone like me to viewing things differently. Um, the Arcturians, for example, is a group that we talk about all the time, because they're elevated beings. I have a strong Arcturian energy in me. They're the teachers. That's the reason why throughout my life I've always wanted to teach people what I knew. I wanted to help their lives. In this case, it's the book, but before it was maybe in how to pay a loan faster, something simpler. But Arcturians actually came from their planet actually, or the whole star system came through a different reality that was absorbed into a black hole. So they themselves went through that massive trauma of seeing their society and their planets, what they thought would be destroyed by this black hole, when in reality it was just a portal to go into a higher energy. So that's the reason for me why, if we were to have a solar flare, for example, and he wipes out everything on the surface of Earth, that's wiping out at that lower frequency. But in quantum physics, you cannot have any kind of change without injecting energy. So that's the additional energy that it would take to push all the people and the planet itself into that higher consciousness realm. So I'm a star seed because, even though I have had many incarnations on Earth, I've had incarnations in Atlantis, Old Egypt, Lemuria, but I'm in a linear time form. My latest incarnation would have been in a planet outside of Vega. Now we call it Vega, but they call it Olmeca. Olmecans came to Mesoamerica, and they were here in Mexico. They seeded quite a bit of they put a lot of their influence into the population where I come from. So it made sense that I would be born into a genetic code that would match the life that I chose to bring into this existence. So as a star seed, I am think of it as someone who comes from outside to participate in what's taking place right now. And if go on.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish that thought.
No, and the intuitive part is just something that I think everybody has, except that when we grow up, we're told that if you can read people's minds, that there's something wrong with you, and many people may block those abilities they have. I have friends who have no problem seeing an aura, for example, but as children, they had to put up with being ostracized by other people who didn't understand what that meant. And then others who can look at you and immediately sense if there's anything wrong with your organs. They can sense inside of your body. And everybody comes with different gifts, but depending on the life experience that we chose, we may put a pause button on them. But this is a time when those gifts can be turned on.
At some point in your life, you discovered your soul contract, and that kind of overrules other things in your life, right?
I found my all my previous contracts, but your higher self would never let you know what's coming because many of us would just choose out of it. Because again, we when we see, let's say chaos, I may choose not to go through chaos. There's a car accident on the road, I'm going to go around that. But the truth is, maybe I have to go through that in order to be who I need to be, in order to acquire that energy, that resonance. So our higher self, and by the way, and I don't ask those questions either, because I understand when I started doing this, there was a moment when I challenged my higher self, and I was kind of angry because everything was coming cryptically. It was almost like I had to interpret it, and it was not clear. And I demanded to be treated as an adult. And when I did that, my connection with my higher self evaporated for 2 weeks. There was nothing there. It was empty. And I understood then, because answers came later. At the third week, I got to understand what the goal of the human is, which is gain consciousness, and the goal of the higher self is, which is experience low consciousness. They're actually in opposite directions. Therefore, and why would a higher self want to experience low consciousness? In my book, I talk about Duchamp. If you ask a, a person in the art world who is the most influential artist of the 20th century, I mean, average people will say Picasso or Dali, but experts in the field, they're going to talk about Duchamp. And most people don't even know who that is. Well, Duchamp is the guy who submitted a urinal to an art competition in New York as a piece of art. And, you know, when the people at the competition received it, they thought it was a joke. They were offended. But the art world, they responded with a philosophical take, which is art is not the skill to make something. Art is a piece of art becomes art when the artist baptizes it as art. That's what created the ready-made movement. And after that, suddenly artists could paint like children. So you have uh, you have people like Duchamp that appear to be doing something that is negative, but in reality becomes what has to be. So my when I asked these questions to my higher self, I was coming from a low frequency. Once I understood that the only way the higher self can experience creation, which by the way, creation is love. Creation is what makes the universe. So you create a baby and you love it. You create a poem, you love it. You create a painting, you love it. So in order for to have that experience, who creates the most? Children. Naiveness is the key for being creative. What it's an accident for an adult, for a child is an act of creation. So the reason why higher selves come into this, want to experience this existence through us, is because we're the most creative in the universe. We make mistakes. We do what Duchamp did. An angel would have never submitted that urinal because he would have known what he was going to create in the minds and the feelings of the people from the show. But a child would. And that naivete is what makes us special. And that's the reason, again, why while we're trying to gain consciousness, the higher self, it's celebrating that we are the naive children that we are. And again, it's just that balance of the universe, which is a beautiful waltz. What seems chaotic is everybody dancing in rhythm with each other.
You spoke about angels, but do you think it's possible that there are negative entities out there that could be affecting us?
Sure, of course. But at the same time, I'll tell you this. You show up with a flashlight into a movie theater room, where everybody's about to watch the movie and the lights are off, and not one of those persons is going to want to have anything to do with you. In other words, when your resonance increases, they're always, those negative beings are always there. They're always present. But if you don't resonate with them, it's very difficult for them to exist with you. Notice that when people experience angels, they hardly ever talk about touching angels. Just because touching a being of very high energy would probably burn us. It's the kind of thing that is just not for us. So we, sure, they're there, but it's not for us. And again, in this case, they're not for me. And yeah, they happen, but they're not. I don't interact with them.
Do you think that we have already begun moving into the ascension, or it is yet to come?
Ascension is a process. We have certainly begun. I mean, for me, my changes took place, but it's not a moment in time. It's a process. It's going to take time for all of us to get there. Now, is it a moment when suddenly some big catastrophic event happens and then we switch? Perhaps. But I'm truly not concerned about that, because if and when it happens, I know the direction that I'm going.
Well, if people want to find out more about Ascension Chronicles, should they go to Amazon or a website?
So the book is available worldwide at every large retailer, almost every large retailer. But if they go to my website, which is Alberto Alejandro Lopez, Alberto, Alberto, Alejandro, Alejandro, Lopez, Lopez.com, they'll be able to find out all the information about the book.
Alberto, before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Yes, follow your greater joy. Understand that being who you are is what you came here to be. And no matter what others think, it doesn't matter how isolated, how happy, how unhappy people are with you. As long as you follow your greater joy, you're being exactly in alignment with who you are.
Alberto, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.